By the end of this scene, you'll have built your first MCP server and connected it to Claude. This will allow you to harness the power of Claude in your projects, making development faster and more efficient. First things first, what is an MCP server? An MCP, Meta Controller Process, server acts as a bridge between Claude and your applications, allowing you to call Claude's API directly from your code. Essentially, it's a way to make Claude part of your local dev environment. Let's get started with setting up the basic structure. Open your terminal or command prompt. We're going to create a new directory for our project and navigate into it. Dear my_project. cd my_project. Setting up a virtual environment ensures that any dependencies you install are isolated from your global setup. This is especially useful in shared environments like CI/CD pipelines. To create and activate the virtual environment, run Python mvenv env. Source env/bin/activate hashtag on Windows. Use env \scripts \activate. We need to install Claude Python package, which is the official Python client for interacting with Claude. Install it using pip. Pip install Claude Python. Now, let's create a simple server file. Let's name it mcp_server.py. Open your favorite code editor and add this basic setup. Python. From First API import Fast API. From Claude_API, import Claude client. App equals Fast API. Client equals Claude client. API_key equals your _here. At app get / async def read_root. Response equals client dot generate_message. Prompt equals hello world. Return message response content. To run the server, execute. Unicorn mcp_server app. Reload. Open your browser and navigate to http://127.0.0.1:8000/. You should see a response from Claude saying, "Hello world." Now that you have set up the basic MCP server and connected it with Claude, feel free to explore more features of Claude within your applications. Start adding more complex prompts or integrate Claude into larger projects. All right, now that we've introduced the concept of MCP servers in the first scene, let's get our hands dirty by setting up the environment you need to start building your first server. By the end of this setup, you'll have all the tools and configurations ready to go. First things first, you'll need to make sure you have Node.js installed on your machine. You can check if it's already there with Node.v. If it's not, head over to nodejs.org and install the latest version. Next up, we need to get the MCP server software. Open a terminal or command prompt and run npm install gmcp. This will install the MCP server globally on your system. Now that you have the MCP server installed, let's move on to setting up the Claude API client library. Head over to your project folder in the terminal and initialize a new Node.js project with dear mymcp server, cd mymcp server, init. Now, we need to install the necessary dependencies. Run this command to add the Claude API client as a dependency. npm install at anthropic/Claude. With those dependencies installed, let's set up a simple index.js file for our MCP server. Create it with touchindex.js. Open index.js in your editor of choice and add the following code to connect it to Claude. JS. Const MCP equals require MCP. Const Claude ou égale require @anthropique Claude. Async function main. Const client equals new MCP. Name, my first MCP server. Version 1.0.0. Const Claude client equals new Claude. Await client.start. Main.catch error equals console.error. Failed to start the server. Error. This code initializes an MCP server and connects it to Claude using that Anthropic/Claude library. Finally, let's make sure everything is working as expected. Run your server with MCP index.js. You should see a message in your terminal indicating that the server has started successfully. All right, you've got your environment all set up. Now let's configure the MCP server so that it can talk to Claude. we'll be editing a few files and setting up some ports. By the end of this, your MCP server will be ready to connect. First, navigate to where your MCP server project is located. Open the MCP server.config file in your preferred editor. This is where you'll define all the connection parameters for Claude. Let's start by adding some necessary configuration settings. 1. Open MCP server.config. Set code MCP server.config. 2. Set up the port. We need to specify which port the MCP server will listen on. For this example, let's use 8080. Plain text, port 8080. 3. Define Claude key. You'll need your API key from Claude to authenticate your connection. Replace your Claude API key with the actual value. Plain text, Claude API key. Your Claude key. 4. Set up connection with URL and server URL. These are the URLs that will be used for communication between the MCP server and Claude. Use your local machine's IP address or host name here. Plain text, connection URL, http://localhost 8080. Server URL, http://localhost 3000. 5. Save and close MCP server.config. Now, you need to make sure that the server is listening on the correct port. Open your terminal and navigate to the project directory. cd path/to/MCP server. Run your MCP server with these settings. Node MCP server.js. You should see a message indicating that the server has started successfully. By the end of this, you'll be able to send requests from your MCP server to Claude, unlocking a world of AI possibilities. To integrate your MCP server with Claude, you'll need to use the Claude API. First, you'll need to handle authentication. You can do this by creating an account on the Claude website and generating an API key. Once you have your API key, you can use it to authenticate your request to the Claude API. To send a request to Claude, you'll need to use the https://api.claude.ai/v1 endpoint. For example, if you want to use the Claude API to generate text, you can send a post request to https://api.claude.ai/v1/generate. You'll need to include your API key in the authorization header of the request, and you'll need to specify the parameters of the request, such as the prompt and the maximum length of the response. Let's take a look at some example code. You can use a library like requests in Python to send HTTP requests to the Claude API. Here's an example of how you might use the request library to send a request to the Claude API. Request.post https://api.claude.ai/v1/generate single quote headers equals authorization bear your y JSON equals prompt hello world max_length 100. Replace your API key with your actual API key and modify the prompt and max_length parameters to suit your needs. With this code, you'll be able to send requests from your MCP server to Claude and start building your own AI-powered applications. All right, now that we've integrated our MCP server with Claude, it's time to test the connection. This will ensure everything is working as expected and that data is flying back and forth smoothly. By the end of this step, you'll be able to send a simple request from your MCP server to Claude and see the response. First, let's open up the terminal in our project directory. Make sure you're in a root folder where your app.js or main.py file is located. If not, navigate there with bash cd path/to/your/project. Next, we'll send a sample request to Claude using the exact endpoint and method setup during integration. In your app.js, find the route you created for handling requests from Claude. Maybe it's something like /API/ClaudeFeed. For this example, I'm going to assume you're using an HTTP post request. To test this, open a new terminal tab or window and run bash curl xpost http://localhost 3000/API /Claude feed message hello from MCP server. This command sends a JSON message to the /API/Claude feed endpoint. The D flag allows you to pass data in the request body, which is what we're doing with our message. Now, go back to your main terminal window where your MCP server is running. If it hasn't started already, start it by bash node app.js hashtag or python3 main.py if that's your entry point. Back in the first terminal window, hit enter. If everything is set up correctly, you should see a response from Claude. It might look something like this. JSON response, hello back from Claude. Your message was, hello from MCP server. This response indicates that your request was processed and Claude responded with the expected output. If you see an error or don't receive any response, go back through your setup steps to debug. Check your API endpoint, request methods, and any middleware configurations. Now, let's move on to our final step, fine-tuning your integration. By the end of this, you'll be able to take your MCP server and Claude connection to the next level. You've just tested your connection and seen it work. That's a huge milestone. Now, it's time to explore what else you can do with your setup. You want to dive into the Claude.md documentation, which is the central hub for all things Claude. There, you'll find detailed info on the available endpoints, features, and how to use them. To get started with something practical, try integrating your MCP server with a simple Claude skill, like a chatbot. You can do this by running a command like Claude skillinit in your terminal. This will give you a basic template to work from, and you can customize it to fit your needs. As you move forward, remember that practice is key. Don't be afraid to experiment and try new things. That's how you'll really get a feel for what's possible with Claude and your MCP server. If you want to stay up to date with the latest tutorials and workflows, consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. Your next step is to open up a terminal, navigate to your project directory, and run Claude skillinit to start building your first Claude skill.